if we're going to be successful in this climate change stuff, those people who have signs like that outside their houses are amongst the people whose minds we have to change, right? So the big question is, how do we talk to, because for a bunch of reasons. One, we're having a hell of a time getting legislation passed. But two, even if we get the legislation passed now, what happens the next time we have a Republican administration? How is it that we know that the legislation won't get rolled back? So what that means is if we want the type of change that we're gonna, that is required for us to be successful when it comes to climate change, not only do we have to get legislation, but we have to work on changing the culture. Because the culture itself has to introject the values inherent in the climate change legislation if it's going to stay on the books. So, No Impact Man, the book and the film, originally were about creating a story that I hoped, if you haven't heard, it's about my family and I trying to live as environmentally as possible. And they're about creating a story that I hoped wouldn't speak to kind of you guys, but would speak to a larger audience just because it was a narrative. I hope that the story would attract more people than a polemic would. Because, the liberals read Tom Friedman's books, the conservatives read Ann Coulter's books. We all congratulate ourselves for seeing our own ideas in other people's books, and nobody changes their minds. So how can we create stories that engage people that might not be engaged in our regular discourse? And so that was the meta of No Impact Man. It was, in some ways, it was a communication strategy. It's multi-layered, but in some ways the idea was just like, is it possible to create a story that people will watch and then meanwhile start a conversation with them? While I ran the project, I had a blog, and what I wasn't expecting, so what I wasn't expecting is that literally thousands upon thousands of people wrote to me and came to the blog and were part of the community on the blog discussing how they could live more environmentally. Now, the kind of discussion that we were having was not about changing from plastic to cloth bags. The discussion that was happening on the blog was were deeper changes, changes away from consumption towards social connection instead, changes like larger, choosing to get rid of your car, riding, but like larger lifestyle changes than how we purchase. And I got many emails from people because it was because the project in some ways was about values, about how we live as people, and not so much about climate legislation per se, although I used the blog to feed people into organizations like One Sky and whatnot. It was about certain values. I got, surprisingly, a large number of Christian conservatives came to the blog. And they said things like, I got one email that, and I'm not endorsing this point of view, but I got emails that said things like, I hate Al Gore, but I love you. And I'm cuter, but but the point was that I had stumbled onto something. Apparently I had stumbled on a way to talking to a different constituency. So I just want to tell you a little bit about the No Impact Project, which is the nonprofit project that we've started to follow the book and the film. And the No Impact Project is about helping people to choose lifestyle adaptations that are both better for the environment and better for them. And the reason why, and largely it's about helping people to find ways to replace consumption with connection, social connection. There's two reasons for that. One is that the positive psychologists, the happiness psychologists tell us actually that we will be happier if we're more socially connected than if we consume. Like that's what makes us happy. So it's kind of a way to get people to do environmental things and get them feeling good about it at the same time. And second, some environmental psychologists are telling us that actually social connection, the more social connection we have, the more intuitively we understand our connection to the planet. that we understand, if we're independent socially, interdependent socially, we understand interdependence in its widest sense. And that people who are socially connected are more likely to support environmental agendas. So this is the model for change, and it's the model for getting three groups involved. College students, because it's kind of a no-brainer. We have so many college students coming to us all the time. Future business leaders, for reasons because it's a leverage point. And finally, faith communities, because they've expressed to us through the blog and elsewhere, some faith communities have expressed that they share the values inherent in this stuff. And so the idea is that if we can get them aboard, then eventually, if you can get lifestyle change, if you get people to have skin in the game, as it were. And once they have skin in the game, it's not to say that they're going to start voting for the Democratic politicians, but it is to say that our hope is that they'll begin to put grassroots pressure on their own politicians, on their own side of the aisle. So it's obviously, we have to put many shoulders to the door, that there are many models of change. We have to use all of them at the same time. This is one model of change. But what Wood and why I'm introducing this to you is because Wood and I were hoping that we could start a conversation here, because so many of us are working in the environmental field, which is that how do we be real leaders, right? Because to be leaders does not mean that we just talk to people who agree with us. How do we talk to the person who had that sign out on the road, who said the wages of sin is, how do we talk to people who are different than ourselves is the question. So with the No Impact Project, by the way, it's at noimpactproject.org if you want to check it out, and it's having a big launch on the Huffington Post on October 18th. So the challenge here is how do we talk to the rest of the country? So because it may mean that we have to change our language, and we have to change our language, we have to change our values. I wanted to read you this email that I got just before I close. This came as a result of my book, actually. It says, this is from a man named Ed. I'm a hardcore conservative married to a wannabe hippie. She got your book, and I found it intriguing enough to read. The book is entertaining and I didn't give him any money. The book is entertaining and enlightening. I applaud you for overcoming the liberal tendency to just complain and point fingers. He's talking about the fact that No Impact Man is about me actually trying to live environmentally instead of that was the idea, that it wouldn't be a finger wag. It wouldn't, of course I want to wag my fingers all the time, but I work against the tendency. And No Impact Man was about me changing my life and letting other people just look in, right? So it was not about, the hope was that it wouldn't be as politically challenging to people. Anyway, blah, blah, blah. You should be proud, but this is the interesting part. In the title of the book, I call myself, it says that, No Impact Man, a guilty liberal finally snaps, et cetera, et cetera. So I identify myself as a liberal in a self-deprecating way, though. So then he says, you identify yourself as a liberal. Why is that important? It seems like the liberals have taken ownership of the environmental issues, and if you don't do it their way, then you're just not cutting it. It is like, listen to this, it is like I have to support gay marriage, socialism, socialized medicine, and try to love every third world dictator, or I am just a right-wing pig. You seem to have veered away from this approach, and so I compliment you for it. I wish that other greenies would not isolate those of us on the right that do care, do make an effort in our businesses to conserve, support worthwhile charities, etc. So the challenging thing about that email is that he says a lot of stuff that I really don't agree with, right? So the question, I think it may be incumbent, the question becomes, if we're going to deal with this climate issue, is how do we are we going to separate it from the entire progressive agenda and just deal with climate? Or do we have to have the progressive agenda be part of it too? So the question becomes like, how do we talk to people that have different views on so many other things?